Hello, friends. On the heels of the COVID-19 quarantine, when you thought things couldn't get worse, they did. Just as we were on the cusp of reopening the economy and getting it jump-started again, getting people back to work, the killing of George Floyd at the hands of a police officer in Minneapolis sparked an uprising that went national and now global. Massive protests have been taking place all over the world decrying systematic racism, police brutality, and calling attention to the deep flaws within our criminal justice system. At the center of this protest is Black Lives Matter, which is a slogan to indicate that the mistreatment and devaluing of Black people by our criminal justice system and the police must stop, and that Black lives must be valued. However, Black Lives Matter is not just a slogan to chant or to post. It's also an organization with an agenda that some can agree with and others cannot. And so this presents a dilemma for the supporters of the protests who do not agree with the total program and the goals of the movement. That's okay. Most of these protests were peaceful, but in many cities and towns, the anger spilled over into increasing spirals of violence, looting, assaults on persons, attacks on the police forces, burning buildings like the police stations and banks, vandalizing and defacing national monuments, destroying businesses, and sadly even murder. People have lost their lives. Minority neighborhoods have been left in ruins, and businesses owned by people of all different races are gutted and charred. In a few cities, the animosity aimed at the police force injured many officers. Spokespersons for the protest have advocated not only reforming the police force in a cosmetic way, but also of defunding it. Now, defunding for some means simply reallocating funds for aiding the community and relieve the police of many of the duties so that they can focus more narrowly on crime. That would be helpful. Others are advocating for abolishing the presence of the police altogether. Big cities with no police force at all is their vision. This is more difficult to see its practicality and realism. Big cities in the USA are in chaos. A complicating factor is that many of the rioters came from outside the cities that have been experiencing these protests and riots. They came to provoke violence and to incite the riots. And unfortunately, their provocative actions have not been adequately renounced, even when several Black people were murdered by the rioters. The protests and the riots overlap and blend into each other. We cannot make a clear distinction between the persons involved in peaceful protest and those who wait until dark to stir up violence. Many people applaud the protest but cannot approve the destruction of the riots. I think we can all agree that something has gone terribly wrong, and we're trying to get a handle on the problem to grasp the source of the rage. The accepted version is that Black persons and persons of color have been profiled, targeted, treated unfairly, and harassed by the police. Too often, their justice and fair treatment under the law is denied or delayed. And when abused by the police, they see little or no consequences or disciplinary actions taken against the offending officers. The police then get away with mistreatment of citizens based largely on the color of someone's skin. The police cover for one another. That's another dynamic. Strong police unions can make a problem just go away without due process. This is the perception, and too often the facts bear this out too. This will play out in the next few weeks with people taking sides and the terrible abrasion in our culture. The divisions are just deepening. Something has been set in motion, and it will affect us all. Now, people of faith can watch these events and participate. We participate too because we all have a stake in the outcome. We want injustices to be addressed, don't we? Of course. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice. They shall be filled, said Jesus. We want all people to be valued as God values all lives. We want to oppose evil and injustice in its many forms, as our baptismal vows assert. Wherever there is oppression and exploitation, we want to oppose it in the name of Jesus. We cannot ignore and embrace racism as normative, and the lives most affected by it can tell their stories to help everyone understand. We hope to be agents of liberation to the oppressed. We want to hear the cry of the needy and not abandon the afflicted to their tormentors. We need to see where we are compliant ourselves and where we benefit from the advantages that we have, and we can seek to make some changes. I want to share an analysis of our social life to present just a little map of how society works. I hope that this can serve as sort of a tool of thought. You can put it in your thought toolbox to explain some of the dynamics of the present chaos, the rage, and possibly help us to understand and make a few steps towards changing this. Understanding it is one step, but there are three systems that work in concert that when working well bring a harmonious balance to our social existence. We are social beings. We live in society. We are persons in society. No one is really an island. So let's try to understand these three systems. I've derived this from Brian McLaren's book, Everything Must Change. The first I will call the prosperity system. The prosperity system. Don't you want to prosper? How are goods and services and the necessities of life generated and distributed in society? I'm talking in the prosperity, or we could also call it the wealth system. That we have access to goods, we have access to services to meet basic needs for survival and luxury needs too. What does it take to survive and more than barely existing, but to thrive? The world is abundant in food. We need it. Access to clean water, isn't that basic? Shelter, where do you live? Clothing, health, and even entertainment for enjoyment and pleasures in life like music and the arts. And everyone needs adequate sanitation to remove waste. We all need to have safety from dangers without and within. And people need meaningful work. We all have gifts and abilities, and we don't just want to lay around all the day. We want to employ our gifts and our abilities, and we want to do that for some kind of compensation that comes our way and helps us. We need jobs. Now, all of these elements make up the prosperity system, whereby people survive, and more than survive, even thrive as human beings. The prosperity or the wealth system. This system is in place in various ways in all different kinds of societies and cultures. You could be, my wife worked with a hunter-gatherer culture and how that they sought prosperity. There's Aboriginal people, they're mountain dwellers, they're cave dwellers, and we live, most of us in America, live in a modern, industrialized, and highly technically advanced society. So where is the food produced? And what do we people eat? It's what's available. There's farming, there's hunting, there's fishing, there's gathering. And housing, for example, shelter. What kind of dwellings do people live in? Some people live in caves, in mud huts with thatched roof. We have a modern split-level house. There are high-rise apartments, all different ways of dwelling, but we all need food, shelter. And we wear clothes. The weather dictates that we have to have them on. We have to do them for modesty reasons. We also do it so that we can do our work. And what are our clothes made of, and how do we have access to clothing? And health is another issue that is part of the wealth and prosperity system. What forms of health care are available? In some societies, there are local healers or shaman, herbalists. In our society, we have general practitioners and we have medical specialists. We have hospitals and emergency rooms. We have urgent care units. We have many different ways, dentists and eye doctors and ear doctors, all to help us with our health. And We not only need the bare necessities to get by, but entertainment is a big part of life. So we have the arts like painting and sculpting and dance and theater, and people love to go to movies and watch television. There's sports and there's games and there's toys. These things make life even better. And then there's sanitation and the removal of waste materials and dispose of them. This is all part of our wealth or our prosperity system. And the truth is, our earth provides these resources, and we as human beings employ our minds and our human labor to reap the benefits of this abundance. We do it through farming and fishing and mining the earth for minerals and other materials, logging and drilling. We mix labor with nature to produce the goods and the services that form the necessities and even the luxuries that sustain life and help us to thrive. So we have the prosperity or the wealth system, but there's a second system that is also part of our society. The second system that we can identify is equity or the justice system. Equity or the justice system. What kind of arrangement in a society governs how people have access to the necessities and to the luxuries, the goods and the services that the earth and human beings are able to produce? How are these goods and services distributed? On what basis? On what basis does a person have access to, let's say, health care? It costs money. Should it always cost money in every case? How do we arrange for it that equitably that people have access to health care or food or good sanitation so that waste materials and dangerous materials are removed and just don't pile up around us? Sewage systems, for example. Who gets to eat at the high-end restaurants, and what clothing is available, and on what basis can you have access to clothing? Do we make our own clothing, as some cultures do, or do we purchase it and have some means of exchange? Well, this is something that the wealth system produces, but the equity system determines largely how we have access to it. So when we use the word equity or justice, we mean simply that which is fair. One philosopher in the past defined justice as to render to each one their due. This means that a person's claim on access to these necessities and luxuries, it's their due. What should we all strive for to be sure that this man or this woman or this boy or this girl have access to the necessities of life and services? And when I work, what makes an equitable or just compensation for my work? For example, I think we're familiar that slavery has been a part of our history. Slavery is a breach of equity, of the equity system, because it steals the compensation from the workers for his or her labor. They're working for free or for a bare subsistence existence to do the work, but the benefits go to the owner, to the master. Workers who are paid substandard wages cannot gain access to health care, to food, to child care. Or they must be maybe content to live in substandard housing. Or maybe be in a community in which sanitation or police protection or fire departments are just not adequate, or the education is not adequate. Now, the equity system encompasses the regulation of all of our economic life, how goods and services are distributed, and how labor is justly compensated. But the equity system also includes some form of arbitration when disputes arise between competing claims over property, or compensation due to injuries that were sustained accidentally or inflicted by neglect or even on purpose. How are these claims and disputes settled equitably, fairly, to bring the best outcome for all those who are affected? We have courts, that's part of the equity system, with judges and specified protocols to address grievances and complaints. We can call this the equity or justice system. So we have the prosperity system by which goods and services are are available and are generated. And then we have the equity system about the distribution of these things, the justice of it. And then we have a third system to which we must attend. Society also requires some system of protection against threats, both from inside and from the outside of the community. In some societies, wild animals can pose a threat, so their security system would be warriors with weapons that are necessary to defend themselves against wild animals, or maybe the community has to build barriers like walls or fences or trenches to prevent danger to the society. But the largest threat in most every society comes from other human beings. People steal. People get angry and fight. People murder. People slaughter each other. People exploit others, and they rape and they enslave and they traffic in persons. This is part of the human condition, that we live in a dangerous world, much of which is occasioned by what we Christians refer to as sin. Sin means that we're alienated from what God made us to be. We do not see ourselves as beloved children of God. We do not love as God loves. We do not love our neighbor as ourselves, as God would have us to do. We do not treat our neighbor as God wills us to do. When Jesus said, treat other people the way you wish to be treated, but sometimes we don't. Sin points to desires that are gone awry. We have passions. We have powers within us that become unbridled, that can lead to human misery. So wherever these things are given a free rein, like greed or selfishness or deception or hate or fear or revenge, these all taint the human heart and introduce poisons into human relationships. And that's where the complication comes in. Now we have a security system. On the international level, in relationships with other nations, and in the technologically advanced industrialized nations as we live in the United States, we call it, for external threats, the military. Security here includes various branches of the service, all with very complex organizations and rules, the officers, the soldiers, rules of engagement, and it includes weaponry adequate to defend the interest and the well-being of the people who belong to that nation. The task is to provide for the common defense against aggression, invasion. On a domestic level, the security system is to assure domestic tranquility, that we have laws and we have those who are tasked to enforce the laws. That is the police force. So these three systems, prosperity or wealth system, the equity or justice system, and the security or protection and enforcement system, these comprise the basic organization that we know as society. All three work in concert to make and keep life human, to make life human and to keep life human. But sometimes the greed of those using the prosperity system distorts its usage, and social arrangements exclude many people, depriving them of access to the necessities, the goods, and the services that they need. This is, of course, very obvious within a system that allowed slavery in, or the subjugation of any people, moving them off of their resources so that somebody else could have them. Sometimes the equity system is so broken, and it's not equitable, not just for too many people. A lot of people don't have access to the goods, to the services, to the guaranteed protections, or even to be able to make an appeal. Laws, like the Jim Crow laws, are inherently unfair, and the security system begins to defend the indefensible. When this happens, people are angry and they feel excluded. They feel abused. They feel denied of their rights. They may put up with it for a while, maybe for a long while, and suppress the anger and not do overt acts of civil disobedience or of standing up for themselves. But that low-grade anger will eventually boil over and spill out. If they have no recourse and the equity system has failed them And if the security system fails to provide the needed protection or works actively against the just demands of those who are aggrieved, then a massive social upheaval will result. I think that's what's going on. Security, of course, when this happens, will of necessity be increased, and the rage will escalate. Security will resort to more severe tactics to force or quell the crowds, and this will meet with increasing resistance until violence breaks out on all sides. People will be hurt, people will be killed, businesses will be destroyed, buildings will be burned. It becomes a descent into collective insanity because the root causes of the injustice remain unaddressed. That's where things seem to be at present. When social upheavals like this occur, emotions run high, and the pendulum swings in the far opposite direction to the extreme. Sometimes what we need is cooler heads to sort out solutions. And as people of faith, we want to try to have solutions that demonstrate the love that Christ has. We want to return to a real justice system, a real equitable system, equity system. One professor said that justice is what love looks like in public. Calm down. James wrote, "Know this, my dear brothers and sisters. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to grow angry. This is because an angry person doesn't produce God's righteousness." We can start with listening. I believe that there are legitimate claims that can be addressed. If a segment of the population has been denied justice, if the equity system has failed a segment of the population, maybe due to culture, maybe due to ethnicity, or even the color of the skin, then we may look at where the systems have not been working in harmony and not been producing the well-being and benefit of all, where basic human rights and human dignity have been denied. We can seek how the systemic malfunction has occurred and what steps we need to reform it and get back into gear where all the needs are being addressed and people are being valued. This is just my reflection on the three systems in the light of the present chaos.